Peoples Under Threat is an index of the risk factors by state for genocide, mass killing or other systematic violent repression. It takes the known indicators for mass killing, so that might be poor levels of governance, relative international isolation, history of violence, ethnic or sectarian tension. It values those indicators using current authoritative sources to combine them into one index which gives you an assessment of the risk factor by community in every country. Countries in Africa and the Middle East have dominated both the top countries in the list, i.e. those where the risk is greatest, and also those countries which have significantly risen in the list over the last year, i.e. where the threat level is suddenly increasing. We know, of course, about South Sudan and the Central African Republic, where the threat levels have been rising over the last 2 years. We sadly know about the situation in Syria, but it also shows us that the threat level is rising in some other countries which perhaps receive less attention, including in Yemen, in Egypt, in Mali, and also, again, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where a series of wars in the east continues, seemingly without end. Both South Sudan and Central African Republic have risen up the index. They have been rising for the last 2 years. They now show threat levels which are close to those in Somalia, in Sudan, and in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In all 5 of those countries, we're talking about a critical level of threat now. Mass killing is ongoing, and a wide range of communities, both ethnic and sectarian, are at grave risk. The effect of the revolutions in the Middle East, or rather what we should now call the failed revolutions in most countries in the Middle East, has been devastating for minorities. It has led to a threat level rising in many states. Of course, it's hardly a surprise, sadly, to see Syria so high up in the table again this year. There, the conflict has been fragmenting. Of course, we continue to see grave abuses by government forces of President Assad, but also now there are a proliferation of Islamist groups, both Al-Qaeda, but also the Al-Nusra Front and the Islamic Front, all of which pursue an openly sectarian agenda. So communities, for example, like the Kurds in the north, are facing attacks from all sides now. In addition to Syria, Yemen has entered the top 10 in the table. There's a really grave situation now in Yemen, a very volatile situation in the country, with the Aqdam facing a historically hugely disadvantaged minority, facing significant threats, but also communities like the Zaydi Shia in the north, who are at risk of continuing violence. The situation in Egypt is hugely controversial in terms of international relations, but we have to note a decrease in levels of human rights observance. There's been an increase in civilian killings in Egypt, but also situations like that in the Sinai, where there are ongoing military operations, have failed to make international news headlines, but are very worrying for minorities. We've seen a more authoritarian government that on the one hand has consolidated, or is in the process of consolidating its power, but on the other hand seems to either not be capable or not willing to protect both religious minorities, like the Coptic Christians or the Baha'i, but also ethnic minorities, like the Sinai Bedouin, to the degree that international standards require. Peoples Under Threat is important because it provides early warning of a very particular kind. Now, the UN and other international authorities have got much better about early warning generally, but most of it is focused on, broadly speaking, conventional armed conflicts. What Peoples Under Threat looks at is the specific risk of mass ethnic or sectarian killing, the sorts of conditions that can potentially lead to genocide. That's hugely important for early warning. It's hugely important for those agencies who are concerned with civilian protection. But it also reminds international policymakers about something. You can't predict the future, but we can, on the basis of past experience and the known indicators, identify those places in the world where the chances of mass killing of particular ethnic or sectarian groups is now greatest, and that's what Peoples Under Threat attempts to do.